I'm Marilyn Johnstone. I'm sorry I'm not able to be with you to share in person about the history of Bellevue Christian Church, but by video, well, I'll tell you just a little bit about the long history. The question is, how do you sum up 112 years of history of Bellevue Christian Church in just a few minutes? But maybe we really need to ask the question, what is Bellevue Christian Church? And the church is the people. It's people who God has called together to be His hands and His feet in the North Boroughs area and beyond. But our particular church, Bellevue Christian Church, started back in the fall of 1896. At that time, a paper was circulated around the Bellevue area to see if people were interested in starting a church. Many people had moved from the city out to Bellevue, Bellevue being the suburbs at that time. They had been part of the First Christian Church on the north side, and now that they were out in Bellevue, they wanted to start another church. So 40 people met together on November 23rd, 1896, to see if there was interest in getting the church started. And there was, and they decided unanimously that they would call it Bellevue Christian Church. On November 29th, 1896, the first worship service was held. And it was described later about the meeting of these early worshipers, and it said, quote, "A meeting full of fervor, hope, and confidence that the good Lord would richly bless the work which that little band had so gladly undertaken in His name in those boroughs. They met in an often cold or hot little room on the third floor of one of the buildings in Bellevue," unquote. In October 1897, the charter was adopted. We're so used today to have computers, or before that typewriters, that it's kind of interesting to see that the charter of Bellevue Christian Church is handwritten. So we'll have this passed around so you can take a look at that and kind of see what the handwritten charter looked like. 3 years after this very first meeting, the building, Bellevue Christian Church, was completed and dedicated on November 10th, 1899. And this building, here is a picture of what it looks like, and we'll pass this around. Obviously, this wasn't from 1899. There's cars in the picture, but the structure of the building was as it was in 1899. And the building pretty much stayed that way until 1960. And in 1960, they decided to add an addition to the building. This is a program from that meeting, and it has the proposed architectural design and the floor plan of what they would do. I personally never felt that the addition quite did justice to the architectural structure of the original building, but I wasn't here at that time, and that's what they decided. So that addition was put on in 1960. Something kind of personally interesting is that in the article on the groundbreaking, my husband, Graham Johnstone, is kind of kneeling in the front next to his mother. So I have some personal connection there. And that was the groundbreaking for the building. That building, with the addition, looks like the building does today, except for the interior. Those of you that maybe have been worshiping with us for a while have noticed that we have done a lot of remodeling on the inside, exposing beautiful woodwork in the room adjacent to the sanctuary, new carpeting, new worship center in front. So there have been interior changes, but the structure of the church remains the same as it did in 1960. But a building's only a building, and it's the people that make Bellevue Christian Church, Bellevue Christian Church. It started with only about 44 people, but by 1919, over 500 people had placed their membership at Bellevue Christian. Some of those kind of came and went, but that many people had been involved. And by 1940, over 1,200 people had been part of Bellevue Christian Church. I don't know what it would be today, but it's just interesting to see of the people that have moved into Bellevue area and then, of course, have moved to serve other places. But many, many have come through our doors. One of the outreaches of the church back in the early time, back in 1908, the men of the borough met at Bellevue Christian Church, and they called it Bell-Av-Ben, Men's Bible Class. Combination of Bellevue, Avalon, and Ben Avon. This picture isn't from 1908, but it is a picture before the remodeling of the church and some of the men that were involved in that class. So we'll have that passed around as well. I'm going to read some names to you and see if you can guess what significance these may have had to Bellevue Christian Church. Craig, Place, Lloyd, Pierce, Bright, Stafford, Cock, Helm, Downs, Scott, Payne, Johnstone, Jackson, and when I say the last one, I think that'll give you a hint, Gone. Those are the 14 men that have served as lead ministers at Bellevue Christian Church. It's very interesting that in the first 50 years of our church, 11 ministers served, but since 1949, now think about this, since 1949, there have only been 3 lead ministers at Bellevue Christian Church, and I think that speaks very, very highly for not only the ministers, but also for the church. In 1949, Milton Johnstone came from Cameron, West Virginia to serve a 31-year-long time with the church. And little did I know back in that 1949 when I was just a 5-year-old little girl in New Jersey that what was happening in Pittsburgh would change my life, as my husband is the son of Milton Johnstone. Milton led the church until 1980, and during that time there was a movement in the Christian church to become a denomination, part of a denomination, and it was called the Disciples of Christ. You may already have heard a little bit of that already at the connecting class today. But in 1970, Bellevue Christian Church voted to remain true to our roots and what we believed, and kept our local autonomy. Now, we are part of the fellowship of Christian churches and churches of Christ, but we are not part of a denomination. We choose our own elders, we choose our own ministers, and we are responsible to make sure that the gospel of Christ is preached accurately. As I mentioned, Bob Jackson served from when Milton retired in 1980 to 2004, and then in 2004, Chuck Gone was called to be our lead minister. It's, as I mentioned, kind of interesting that at our 100th anniversary of the church, there were no living previous ministers. Bob Jackson was serving as our minister at that time, and Milton had already passed away. So just interesting how long our ministers have stayed. There are many, many people and names that have continued through the history of Bellevue Christian Church. In the 75th anniversary directory of Bellevue Christian Church, there's still many names that are serving today. People that are still active in the church, Dick Davis, Ruth Robinson, Barb Snyder, Wes Snyder, Graham Johnstone, myself, and there, at the time I did this, we had 4 shut-ins that were in that directory. Since then, Helen Askey and Mid Lenhart have gone to be with the Lord, but Dolores Blazer and Louise Decker are 2 of our shut-ins who were also in that 75th anniversary directory. As always, I think probably with any church, there's always cute stories that go along with the history of the church. One I'll quickly share because it has personal nature, but Milton's study, Johnstone's study, was where Debbie's office is today. And Graham had been downstairs in the nursery during worship and didn't know there had been a baptism. And at that time, we just had a cloth that went in front of the baptistry. So as a little 5 or 6-year-old boy, he came running through the curtains expecting to have a wooden platform over the baptistry to run into his dad's study. And there had been a baptism that day, and so as he ran through the curtains, he splashed into the baptistry, and people have told him that he was frantically doggy paddling to the side when people came to rescue him. There are many, many other stories that go along with the church. Also have some articles here. It's kind of interesting that Mr. Craig was the first minister of the church, and 50 years later he also came back to the church to help serve in various capacities. And there's an article and a picture of both Milton Johnstone and Joseph Craig. It seems that one thing that lots of people took pictures of were the various choirs over the years. And so there's some pictures here of the choirs, and it will show you a little bit what the interior of the church looked like before some of the remodeling as well. In 1999, we were blessed with an endowment through the will of Jane Derriman. She was a dear member of the church, and her endowment to the church made it possible for us to minister in ways that we really never thought we would be able to. We were able to hire associate minister or youth minister and just broaden the ministry of Bellevue Christian Church not only into the community but also worldwide. When we think of our membership in Bellevue Christian Church, or your interest in learning a little bit about Bellevue Christian Church, we're reminded that it's not a building, it's the people, and that God has called us all to be faithful to Him and to serve Him. And I'd like to conclude by reading part of the words from a song that were in our 100th anniversary bulletin. And it said, "Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful. May the fire of our devotion light their way. May the footprints that we leave lead them to believe, and the lives we live inspire them to obey. Oh, may all who come behind us find us faithful." And that is our prayer, that as we worship and serve at Bellevue Christian Church, that those coming behind us and those joining us at Bellevue Christian Church will find us faithful. Thank you.